Hey guys, and welcome to part 2 of this video where I'm going to continue to walk you through the CLO3D interface and basically focus on everything that we didn't cover in part 1. Let's get into it. Now I want to start by drawing your attention to the right hand side of the screen. We have two very important sections over here. The first is our object browser. The second is our property editor. Let's start with the object browser. Now the object browser holds information about objects in our scene. As we can see, by default, it has the Fabric object browser open. However, there's also one for graphics, buttons, buttonholes, top stitch, and a few more options. Let's go back to Fabric. Now, as we can see, I have two fabrics in this scene. I can add another using this add button, and I can also delete it using this trash can over here, but I can't delete any fabric that is currently in use in the simulation. And I can find out what fabrics are in use by simply clicking on them and see what gets highlighted in the 2D viewer window. As I can see, the ribbed is on the cuffs and hemband, and the heavy canvas is on everything else. If I want to apply a different fabric to a pattern piece, I simply drag and drop. Now, as you can see, if I click on an object in the object browser panel, it's going to open a menu in the property editor. The first part of this menu is just general information. You're welcome to change the name if you'd like or attach any other information, but none of this is overly necessary to do anything with. The second part is about the material's visual properties. This is where we can do things like change the type of fabric we're working with from a visual perspective. If I want to make it a silk satin, I simply click this drop-down menu, choose silk satin. I can also choose leather, metal, fur if I'd like, iridescent glitter. There's a whole lot of preset options that you can do that change this fabric from a visual perspective. If I'd like to add a print to my entire garment, I'm going to select this button right here and upload my own image, which is then going to show across the whole garment. And if you remember, this tool up here, the edit texture tool, is where we are going to now be able to manipulate the scale and positioning of this pattern. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and delete that map, and I can also upload my own normal maps or choose one of CLO's preset ones. Basically, a normal map is going to give me this visual texture here that you can see, these little dots that make the garment look more realistic. So this is where you can either upload your own normal map or where you will see one automatically populate when you choose one of CLO's preset fabrics. And moving on down to more visual properties, here we have color, and if we click on this color chip, we can actually change the color of this garment. And we can also mess with the opacity using this slider. We can also manually adjust the roughness, reflection intensity, and metalness of this fabric. As you can see, it's basically adjusting the shine levels. And that's pretty much it for the visual properties of our selected fabric. But if I drop down this physical property menu and then open detail, I'm going to see more options to adjust the physical properties of our garment. Now these sliders are going to let you manually customize things like how stretchy the fabric is, how much it bends or folds, the stiffness, how heavy the fabric is, the drapiness of the fabric, and these are things you all can manually adjust yourself, but if you choose one of CLO's preset fabrics, it will automatically have these settings exactly how they should be. One of the only things I do frequently find myself tweaking is the thickness, because I like to over-exaggerate thickness in my garments, so you can increase this to 1, 2, 3, whatever you'd like, just to give the fabric a little bit more visual thickness. Alright guys, and I'm not going to go through the property editor for every single one of these objects, but just so you know, if you are looking for more information on any object in your scene, you simply go to your object browser, click on your desired object, and you should get a whole new menu in the property editor. Now, it's worth calling out that the property editor is also going to open up when we click on a pattern piece. Alright, so the first section here is general information. It's never a bad idea to give your pattern pieces proper names to keep them organized, and if you export these models into another software, it's going to make your life easier. Now, scrolling down, we see this next section here that has things like elastic, seam taping, and shearing. Basically, applying these things to a model is as simple as checking on this button. I'm going to click on a specific line and then click elastic or shearing, and it's going to apply it right there. And if we scroll down, we're going to see a really important part of this menu called simulation properties. Now, the first thing here is called particle distance. Particle distance is essentially a number that dictates how many polygons will be in this garment. And what that does is make it either a higher quality garment or a lower quality garment. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to turn on polygon view, and I'm going to click on a piece and reduce the particle distance to 5. As you can see, when I click enter, the mesh is going to get a lot smaller. Now if I increase it to 20, it's going to get a lot larger. So typically I keep this number between 10 to 15 when I'm actively working on a project, and when I'm done with the project, I turn it down to 5 to 8 before I export and render, because 5 to 8 is going to be the highest quality garment you can get in CLO3D. Beneath it is the layer setting. This is only going to be important when you are stacking garments on top of each other, like pants under a shirt, but you want to make sure that whatever garment that you are putting on top is turned to 1. And then you're going to click OK, and then when you simulate, this garment will go on top of anything that's underneath it. You can also make this number 2 or 3 or 4, but just make sure whatever is the biggest number is what you want to be on top. So that's how you do layering. And as you can see, when I select more than one piece, some of these settings turn red. All the red means is that it is inconsistent across pattern pieces. For example, this pattern piece might have elastic and this one doesn't. Or this one might have this thickness and this pattern piece might have 0 as thickness. So it just means inconsistency. Shrinkage roughed and warped can be a great way to tweak the fit of a garment without actually manipulating the pattern pieces. Basically what this does is shrinks the garment in a little bit by shrinking each pattern piece in a little bit horizontally, and shrinkage warp shrinks the pattern pieces in a little bit vertically. So instead of doing something like this, if you don't want to change the pattern, you could maybe decrease the shrinkage warp to 90%. I think ideally you want to change the pattern, but if for some reason you don't want to change this pattern, these can be good fit workarounds. Alright, moving on down to thickness. The one you're going to probably pay attention to more is thickness rendering. Basically, this is going to allow you to choose a pattern piece that you want to have a little bit more of this visual thickness like this and increase it. I'm going to go ahead and increase this one by 3, and you can see how it got a little bit thicker. And just for demonstration, I'm going to set it back to 0 so you can see how CLO's default thickness looks on fabric. Alright, and we are going to finish off talking about this menu with pressure. Pressure is how we create anything like puffer coats or anything that looks like it's inflated. It's actually pretty simple. We are just going to layer clone a piece, and then we are going to turn up the pressure on the front piece and turn down the pressure equally on the bottom piece. And when we simulate, we are going to see this puff effect happen. And the only step we were missing there was drawing some internal lines on this pattern piece that would automatically be sewn together. But you can see that this is a very effective way to create that puff effect. Alright guys, and there's a few more tools of this menu, but I think we've covered everything important, so let's move on. Now let's jump over to the other side of our screen and talk about the library. The library is where all of CLO's preset objects are. By default, we are in Garment, and this is where some preset t-shirts are that you can right-click and add to your scene. If I double-click on avatars, I'm going to see that some avatars come up that are preset. I can add them to my scene as well with a simple right-click, add to workspace. Same with hangers, double-click, right-click, add to workspace. So you can see all of CLO's preset objects are right here. And if you remember just a few minutes ago when I was talking about CLO's preset fabrics, they are all right here. Now if we want to add a fabric to our workspace, all I have to do is go back into the fabric object browser and simply drag and drop over here. Then I can apply it to any piece I'd like. You can also add preset hardware and trim to your scene. If we double click and open the library, let's go down to zipper, and why don't we grab a zipper puller. Now I can choose what zipper puller I want here, but as you see when I double click, nothing happens. So I need to choose what zipper puller I like. I'm going to go ahead and grab 3, then I'm going to go into OBJ and right click, add zipper puller 3 to my workspace. I just want to make sure it's set to add, not open. I want to make sure it's set to trim, and I want to make sure the scale is to millimeters, which is CLO's default. If I click OK, it should open in the scene. And I can simply move it around and place it where it needs to be. And that is just about it for CLO's presets from the library. However, there is one more cool thing I'm going to show you. If we click on New Modular Library, it's it's going to open up a bunch of clothes preset garments, but it breaks it down into pieces. So if I click on men's, polos, set in sleeve, and then I choose, let's say I'm looking to add a collar to my scene, I can simply double click this collar and it's going to add it in my 3D window. And this is actually really cool because I can actually build a garment from clothes preset modules, as they call them. Alright, moving on to the tabs at the top of our screen. Now for the most part, these are pretty self-explanatory. We have our typical file where we have things like export and import, save and open. We have edit, which is going to let us undo and redo. Of course, we also have Control-Z. And then we have a few tabs here that are pretty much the same as our 3D and 2D toolbar. So you don't have to pay much mind to those. There are actually only two here that I do use frequently, and that is render and display. If I click render, it's going to open up this render window here, which is how we do our final images and videos in CLO3D. How rendering works is basically you start by clicking this interactive render button where it's going to load up a render preview for the scene. The preview is going to show you in real time how the lighting, fabrication, everything looks. If you want to stop the render preview, you simply click stop. To start your final render, you're going to click this play button right here. So let's just briefly touch on the rest of this menu on the topic of rendering. Over here we have our light tools. This is where we're going to be able to add lights to our scene, which we can then manipulate in the 3D window. Now you won't have to add any additional lighting to the scene unless you want to. CLO already has the scene pre-lit. If we go down to this button here, we are going to look at our render settings. The first section is where we are going to choose if we are rendering an image, a turntable, or an animation. Below that we have image size, where we're going to be able to choose our size of our render. Below that we have our background, where we're going to be able to decide what color we want as the background of this render. We can also render it with transparency. And finally, we're going to choose where we want these renders to save and what the names will be. Moving on to camera properties, there's a couple of things that might be helpful here if you're looking to really refine your renders, but I don't think you need to worry about anything here typically. Lighting settings, this is where you're going to see every light in your scene. By default, CLO has 3 rectangle lights in the scene already, as well as a dome light. So you can definitely mess with any of these settings to adjust how your renders end up coming out. But overall, I think their default lighting is pretty great. Alright, moving on, and down here we have another menu relating to rendering that's going to help us improve the quality of our renders. This tab is really important right here. So I can, for example, reduce the noise threshold to increase the quality of my renders. I can also come down here to quality and increase the light and material quality just to make sure that I'm rendering at the highest possible quality. Alright, so that was the render dropdown. The only other one I really use sometimes is display. And mainly for this window drop down right here. If I go to this window drop down, it's going to let me customize my interface. For example, if I toggle off the 2D pattern window, I'm going to see only the 3D window, and that can be helpful sometimes if I'm styling or tweaking a garment. Alright guys, we're making really good progress. We're almost all the way through part 2. The only other thing I'm going to show you is this drop down menu over here in the top right corner, which has all the different modes we can work in, from simulation to animation to print layout, UV editor, and I'm going to walk you through some of the basics of each of these modes. By default, we are working in simulation mode, but we can also jump to animation mode using this tab. Now, I do have a video that talks in detail about animating garments in CLO3D, so I'm going to keep this to the interface. Down here on the left-hand side, we have our simulation quality. If we are recording an animation, it always must be an animation stable. To actually start recording an animation, we're going to click on this record button, and then these buttons here are for playing back the animation. So once we have animation data recorded, we would just hit play and watch it back. And then in the middle of the screen here, we have current frame, start frame, end frame. This is basically just telling CLO3D what frames you want to record. It typically will start at 0 and go towards 100, 200, 300, however many frames you want included in this animation. Alright guys, let's keep going. Now, I don't find myself using print layout, emulator, or modular very often. If at all, I'm going to skip over those. However, I will say, if you thought the closed preset module thing that I showed earlier was cool, it might be worth exploring modular mode yourself because you can basically build your own templates. Alright, let's continue down to UV editor. Now, UV Editor is something that's only relevant to you if you plan on exporting your 3D models into another 3D software like Blender or Maya. But if you do, you want to always make sure that your UV shells, which are the pattern pieces, are laid out in the 0 to 1 square. So right here above the red and aside of the green. And ideally as large as they can be laid out. So it would probably look something like this. And even if you don't plan to export your models at this point in time, it's still not a bad idea to practice laying out your UVs nice and aligned and within the 0 to 1 square. Alright guys, and that's it. We did it. We made it through the entire CLO3D interface and learned a ton in the process. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you're looking for more tools and resources to help you level up your CLO3D garments as a whole, feel free to check out my course. It is a video series that is all about improving your CLO3D garment called Level Up Your CLO Garments. And as always guys, thank you for watching and good luck.